Hi, my name's Mel and welcome back to my channel Bookish Brummie. So for today's video we're going to be doing a review of the books that I've read in the second week of November. So I'm a couple of days late. Normally I would post this on a Saturday, but I've been mega busy this weekend so I didn't get the opportunity, so I posted a different video which was a roundup of 5 books from 2025 that I would give a 5-star and that I would recommend people read if they're into those kind of books. So we're having the review today of all the books I've read in the second week of November, and then the third week will be done next Monday, and then the roundup will be done the Monday afterwards, so that works out quite well because the end of the month is on a Sunday, I think. So yeah, this last week then we just imagine, actually I think I've had about 9 days to read instead of 7, so I have managed to get through a few, a little bit more than I would normally, just as we bear that in mind because we've got quite a lot to say in this video. So when I finished the last weekly roundup video from the first week of November, I had just started reading Philip Pullman's third book of Dust, The Rose Field, which follows Lyra's journey. Now, Lyra Balakwa, or Lyra Silvertongue as you know her, she's actually had 6 books dedicated to her now. She had the first trilogy, which was the Dark Materials trilogy, which started nearly 30 years ago. And then there's this second trilogy, which is the Dust trilogy. So The Secret Commonwealth, which is the book just before this, had come out a few years ago, and now we've had the final instalment, which is The Rose Field. I was mega excited to read this. I started reading it the moment that I received my copy in the post. I've been following the character Lyra for the nearly 30 years since Philip Pullman first started writing about her, and I've really come to love all the characters that he has created. I did see Philip Pullman speaking at Stratford Literary Festival a few weeks ago, and he said that he thinks that this will be the last book that we have Lyra in, but never say never, because he said that after the first trilogy. However, I did feel like after I finished reading this book, I found it difficult to sort of work out where he might go if he did want to write more about her. I do feel that the story is like rounded off nicely, which is really nice, because I think sometimes when you've been following a character for a while and then you have the final book, sometimes you don't get a very satisfying ending, but I did feel that I had a satisfying ending with this. I think Philip Pullman did a really good job. And one of the things that I found interesting when I did see him speak is he said obviously that the first books are kind of YA, actually they're more children's books, and they won awards to that effect. I think they won the Whitbread Award, but now that Lyra is older in this book, she's 20 years old, he actually wanted to write an adult book. He wanted to make it a bit darker, and he said, you know, children are welcome to read it, but it's not written in that YA style as such. It is become more of an adult book. Lyra's aged, so the sort of writing and the you know, the subject matter of the book has changed. And I think I would actually say in most of the Lyra books that I've read, I've always found them to have quite a dark edge to them, you know, so that doesn't really surprise me. And again, this does have a dark edge to it. I wouldn't say it's like completely unsuitable for a child, but I think probably if you're an adult you might want to just read it first and then make a decision on your kid whether or not you think that that would be suitable for them. But he does say that it's an adult book. So one of the things I really enjoyed about this book is that there's a character called Malcolm Polstead, and he first appears in the first book in this trilogy, which is La Belle Sauvage, and that book is almost like dedicated to him, and he is on a mission to take Lyra to safety because she has been endangered, and he gets her when she's like a baby and he has to take her from point A to point B safely. And I really enjoyed his character. Now in The Secret Commonwealth, which is the second book in this this particular trilogy, we don't really see that much of Malcolm, and I thought that the second book wasn't ultimately my favourite book, I don't think, out of all of the Lyra books. But part of that was because Lyra has like a familiar like animal called Pantalaimon, who she's sort of meant to be with all the time. You know, it's kind of like a person's shadow, if you like. And her familiar were constantly fighting in this second book. And I didn't really like that, because I really enjoyed the relationship that Lyra had with Pantalaimon in the first trilogy. Now, we don't really understand the relationship between Lyra and her familiar in the first book, in the Book of Dust, because she's only a baby. but then in the Secret Commonwealth, it sort of breaks down between them, and I didn't really enjoy that, but I understood that it was a part of, you know, the main overall overarching story that Philip Pullman was like trying to get out there. So I would say in this book, Pantalaimon and Lyra make up, and they sort of get that relationship back on track, and I just found that much easier to read. But also Malcolm Polstead also has a massive role in this book, and he's one of my favourite characters, I think, from the Book of Dust trilogy. So I think that the story was really good. I did feel he rounded off the trilogy really nicely. The only thing that I would say, which was, I wish that he could have explained Dust and the Ruskov field better. I still feel like I've come out of this book and it's like my brain is grasping at the edge of the explanation, but I couldn't turn around and fully explain to somebody what those two things were. And I just think like he could have just pushed for a slightly better explanation. Like I felt like I got to the end and this sort of explanation was there, but it wasn't really there, and then I had to go back and read a bit thinking, oh, have I missed something, you know? And I sort of did that a couple of times. I thought, no, I think it's just a bit of a shaky description. I don't know, maybe if any of you have read this, you could maybe succinctly explain to me what the Ruskov field and Dust is and how they are actually different to each other, because I think that's a bit like where I was struggling a little bit as well. But aside from that, I did really enjoy the story, and I thought I actually appreciated the fact that it was more in an adult narrative rather than a children's one, because when I read the first trilogy I was a young adult, about 16 or 17 years old really, and now obviously my reading has sort of matured a little bit, and I don't always get on with YA books now, so that made it much easier for me to read that this was written from a slightly older narrative. I think on the whole I'm going to rate this a 4.5 out of 5. The only reason I'm not giving it a 5 is because when I sit and think about all of them, like all 6 of the books, and then just the Dust trilogy on its own, I think, you know, my favourite out of all of them, if I remember correctly, was The Subtle Knife, which is the third one from... No, it was the Amber Spyglass. It was the Amber Spyglass. Whichever was the third one in the Dark Materials trilogy. That one, I remember really enjoying that one. And then from the actual Book of Dust trilogy, the first one, La Belle Sauvage, I think is my favourite out of the 3. You know, and I would have rated those a 5. And this one didn't quite get me as much as like book 1 in this trilogy. And also, as I said, because I still don't entirely fully succinctly understand what Dust and the Ruskov field is and how to explain those, is the only reason that I wouldn't give this a 5. But I'm sure lots of people are going to rate this a 5. It's not a bad book, it's a really good book, and I don't think you'll be disappointed if you've been following this story. So yeah, I've rambled about that for quite some time, and maybe I should have done a different video on Philip Pullman and these trilogies, but yeah, I was very excited to read this and excited to talk about it. So after I finished that, I then decided to move on to Kazau Ishiguro's When We Were Orphans. Now, I had put this sort of on my agenda to read because it was published in the year 2000. And I have mentioned before at the beginning of this month that I am doing a reading challenge where there's certain points that I have to hit, like that the book has to have, and then I can cross that off the list. And I had about 15 to begin with at the start of this month to go before I will have completed this list. And there have been 100 points on this list to cross off. And one of the points is a book that was published in the year 2000. So I did a bit of research and found that this one had been published in the year 2000. I was particularly drawn to it because earlier this year I had read Never Let Me Go by Kazau Ishiguro, and I mean I would rate that 6 star. It was just absolutely fantastic, so I really wanted the opportunity to read some more of his work. This book did not disappoint. I tell you now, this is a 5 star. This was a 5 star from this week. You know, a second book of his I've read, so you know I really look forward to moving on to the next one because it feels like he can do no wrong. So the general gist of the story with this one is that we have a guy called Christopher Banks, and it follows his life from it sort of starts off where he's an adult, but then he's looking back on his childhood, and then we see a bit of his childhood. And he was essentially born in Shanghai, and then when he's about, I think he's about 10 years old, and this is happening at the beginning of the 1900s from what I can tell, so like 1912 or something like that. His parents appear to get kidnapped in Shanghai where they're living, and they are living in what would you call it, it's like a foreign protected zone in Shanghai. So what I had not understood until I started to read this book is that after the Opium Wars in the middle of the 1800s in Shanghai, whilst Shanghai was not British ruled, it had British and Spanish interests from what I can tell, and they had representatives living in Shanghai, and they sort of had some say, I think, in how the government managed things and how business was being done. So his father, Christopher's father, worked for a company that I don't entirely know what they did, but for what I can tell from the book, they did make it easier for the transport of opium to happen. His mother was totally against the opioid crisis that was going on, and was desperately trying to get companies to do things that would make it harder for the trading of opium and drugs in Shanghai and obviously the surrounding country. So she often fought with his father over this, and so you can sort of begin to see that they're quite high up. They probably have a lot of knowledge of government activity, and they've also got their hand in the philanthropic side of things as well. And you know, the mob, you imagine, is somehow involved in this as well, because there's drugs going on in the background. And yeah, they appear to get kidnapped and they go missing. And because Christopher is only 10 years old, he then is shipped off to England to go and stay with an aunt. And you know, we then see him sort of at boarding school with a couple of friends there, and they sort of see him as a bit of an odd bod. They think he's a bit weird, but he what I should mention actually is before he went over to the UK, he did have a friend called Akira. Now Akira was Japanese and had moved to Shanghai with his family, and was also living in this protected sort of foreign zone of the city. So after he moved to the UK, he's never going to see Akira again either. So he's had quite a few losses. He's lost, you know, his childhood best friend, he's lost his mum, and he's lost his dad, and that's all happened in a really, really short space of time. But he's also lost, you know, the culture that he is used to growing up in, and the landscape that he's, you know, used to growing up in. So in England, he's outside a lot, and he plays in his own head quite a lot, you know, and people think he's a bit weird. But he plays, he pretends he's playing with Akira, even though Akira's not there. And he basically wants to become a detective, you know. And everyone's like, oh, that's every boy's dream, is to become a detective. And he's like, no, he's seriously going to become a detective. So then this story cuts to the 1930s. And, you know, we are just into World War II. And he has decided to travel to Shanghai because he wants to try and solve some of the problems over there, and he believes that his parents' kidnapping can be solved, and that's somehow going to solve the problems that are happening in Shanghai with the war that they basically seem to be about to embark on as well, with the Chinese, and then there's Russian interests, and the country is in a bit of an unsteady state because it's sort of somewhere between imperialism and, you know, communism, and there's a lot of different things going on and resistances going on, and it's really, really complicated. And again, I not really understood this situation of what was happening in Shanghai at this time, because it's not actually a country that I've ever really looked at or studied. I've never even been over to that far side of the world, so I've never really thought about it, if I'm honest. And in our schooling, like in the UK, we don't really cover that at a secondary school or a high school level. So it was really interesting for me following this story in here, because I was having to go off on Google and look at some of the history just to try and understand, you know, politically what background this book was being set against. So anyway, he goes to Shanghai and he follows some leads that he gets there, and you know, I'm not going to say much more because whether or not he uncovers what happens to his parents and whether or not they're still alive, I won't tell you that because I think that would spoil the end of the book for you. But I just thought that it was, what Kazau Ishiguro does is he's really, really good at just studying, I think, human emotion and how they're going through the different aspects of their life and how they're feeling about these extreme scenarios. Like, he'd done it with Never Let Me Go as well. So again, he's done the same thing in here, I think, with Christopher Banks really well. Christopher has gone through a lot of loss, he's gone through a lot of confusion, and he's gone through a lot of change. And how he's feeling, I think, is described really well, and how he's sort of interacting with the people around him is described really well. But the fact that he sort of set that along, you know, on the back of a really, really complicated political backdrop as well, and he seems to have like done it quite effortlessly the way he has written this. So I just think that this was really, really, really good book. I wish there had been more of it. It's not really that long. It's just over 300 pages long, and I felt that from the moment that I read the opening page, I kept saying to myself, oh, I'm going to go off and make a cup of tea in a minute, or I'm going to go and do this, or I need to go and do the washing up, and I could not stop turning the pages. Like, so yeah, it really does draw you in, and I really do recommend it. I don't see this one as the one that's spoken about the most of all the books he does. Most people are talking about Never Let Me Go or Remains of the Day, or I think there's one called Clara and the Sun as well, which I've not yet read. But I really rate this one. I thought it was a really, really beautiful story. So yeah, we're giving this one a 5-star. So after I read that one, I then had moved on to Margaret Atwood, The Handmaid's Tale. Now again, I had this on my radar because I needed to, on my list of points that I had to hit, one of them was read a book from the banned books list. Now, there is no one banned books list, I know that, but there's quite a few, and if you go through them, this one is often on it. And it's, you know, it's not hard to see why, I suppose, like when I'm going through it, because there are some graphic descriptions of male genitalia, and I suppose it's challenging current religions, it's challenging the current political establishment, and what is right and what is wrong to do. So basically we're following a character called Offred in this. Now Offred is not her real name, it's the name that she is given while she is in this dystopian society, which is actually the Republic of Gilead, or Gilead, I'm not entirely sure how you would say that, but basically the Republic of Gilead have ideas about what a woman's role in society is. So the women are now, you know, they don't have their own names anymore, they're stripped of that, and they're given, the name that they're given is representative of the man whose house they're in. So prominent men who are known as commanders live with their wife, but then they can have a handmaid come and live with them, and the handmaid is there for breeding purposes, essentially. And it's really bizarre, you know, the character is describing, you know, when she's, you know, having to have sex with the commander and what role the wife is playing in it, and it's such a sterile, horrible thing, you know. Nobody really cares about how she feels about things or what her opinions are. It's illegal for women to read in this republic, and they're not allowed to write. Everything, you know, their belongings are searched. What they have to wear like a red cloak dress thing, and they even have to wear like this white bonnet so that when they go out, like they're sort of blinkered like a horse, so they can't like really see all around them without making it obvious that they're looking. And they're just being constantly watched, and everything, you know, their diet, their exercise, everything that they're given is all to make them a pure breeder, to make them a good breeder. And then we also have like other ranks of women in here. So we have like the aunts, and the aunts seem to be women who coach handmaids into what their life is, and you know what they're going to be doing, and how to be the best woman, and how to, you know, be religious in the religion that is in this republic. Now, it's never really sort of said which religion they actually are. It's sort of like a made-up religion that seems to be made up of several other religions, because it is sort of mentioned at one point, like, I think one religious person, whether or not they could get them to conform, and then if not, they get sent away. And then you've also got a line of women as well called the Marthas, and Marthas are kind of like maids that you know, do the cooking and the cleaning of a house and everything for the commander. So, you know, it's, I think if you're a woman, almost like, you know, you're reading this book like feeling angry that, you know, this establishment exists, and, you know, the only thing that a woman is seen as good for is breeding, and, you know, her mind and anything else to do with her is totally irrelevant as long as she's able to breed. And what's really sad is if the women in this republic don't want to do that, then they, you know, they get beaten, maimed, killed, or shipped out to what's called the colonies, where essentially they're made to do some awful types of work and they might die. So what I would say is there's not much plot going on in this book. It's really like a description of the society that Offred finds herself in, and just, you know, some of the situations she gets into while she's trying to live this life. She wasn't born into this life. She does remember her freedom, so, you know, sometimes she's sort of looking back on that, thinking about how, you know, she kind of wished that was still the case. And then there's like other times where she'll sort of be like, well, actually maybe it's better this way in here. And I don't think that the main twist in the story really happens until right on the last page. So, you know, reading a book where it's sort of talking about how all the liberties that women are trying to enjoy today basically ripped off them, you know, and men seem to think that that's in the women's best interest, is frustrating for one thing. And she's, you know, our character seems unable to really do much to liberate herself from that, so that's a little bit frustrating. And the fact that there's no strong plot, you're just sort of reading this like, you know, with a bit of horror that, you know, that society, this fictionalised society, you know, exists in this book. But then there is like a twist on the last page, and it did make me think, apparently there's a second book to this called The Testaments, and I probably would go and read that now, because I really want to find out what happens as a result of the twist in this. So for that regard, it's actually written quite well, because, you know, in parts of it you sort of don't actually want to read this because it's sort of a bit upsetting or annoying, and then, you know, you get to the end and you think, I really want to know what happens next, so I would go and buy it. I think that, you know, Margaret Atwood has imagined a really terrifying society, if I'm honest. Again, like, I don't get scared by many books. I can't really say this scared me, but if this society existed, it would scare me. But I did find that the writing sometimes was a little bit difficult to get on with, and that was just purely because the narrator is basically Offred, and she seems to skip around a little bit from like what she's thinking in the present to then what she might have been thinking, or a situation she was in like 10 years ago, and there's really not much no explanation for that sudden change, and then it switches back again, and you do have to do a double take sometimes and read back and think, okay, that is not in reference to the line before, this is in reference to something that happened like a couple of chapters ago that she was talking about. So that is a little bit confusing, but overall I would give this book a 4. Again, I think it's a really good book, and I would read the second one, although I did find it a struggle at times to read parts of this for various different reasons that I've already just said. But if you're into sort of a dystopian society, this is probably going to be up your street, I'd say. So yeah, I'm glad I finally read this, because I've been saying I'm going to read this for quite a while. So after I read The Handmaid's Tale and When We Were Orphans, and both of those books, to be honest, are quite heavy, so I thought I'm going to read something that's a little bit light-hearted, something that should be easy for me to read, you know. So I decided to pick up an old childhood favourite, which is The Secret Garden. I don't know if you can really see it. The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett. Now, I last read this when I was 12 years old, so, you know, I'm 38 now, so that was, you know, quite a long time ago when I read this book. And I went to book 66 earlier this year and saw that the Cranford collection of The Secret Garden was in there, and I see you get some really good deals in book 66, like 70% off the cover price. So I can't remember how much this one was, but I don't think it really cost me more than £5. And as it was one of my favourite childhood books, I thought I'm going to get me a copy of this. And on my list of points that I have to cover for in this reading challenge that I'm doing, one of them was reread of a favourite classic. So I thought, you know what, let's go for it, let's reread The Secret Garden. It's not very long, it's just under 300 pages. Now, I have watched the film for this as well when I was a kid. I had the 1975 adaptation, which was like a BBC adaptation where they had done a drama series and then they'd condensed it into a video and it kind of looked like a film. And I watched that over and over again when I was a child. Now, I don't have a video player anymore. I don't know what happened to that video, so there's no way for me to really go back and actually see that and do a comparison between the book and this. But I know that I had watched the video many times before I'd actually read the book, because I probably started watching the video when I was about 6 or 7 years old. But I read the book when I was about 12, and I'd absolutely loved it. And, you know, what I loved about the book was the sense of wonderment of being outside. Like being outside in nature is so perfectly described in this book, down to all of the tiniest details about, you know, flowers like and bulbs poking up through the ground in the spring, and you know how to tell live wood from dead wood as the trees are waking up in the spring. And I really enjoyed that, and I'm a bit of an outside person myself. I've always liked to play outside when I was a kid, and then as an adult, you know, I've been a cyclist and I've been a runner. And you know, I like walking as well. I used to go out with my grandparents all the time on walk as well. So I've always appreciated being outside and watching the changing of the season, and that is what I got from this book. However, this book was not the calming read that I thought it was going to be, because when I reread this book as an adult, the shocking level of racism and crude remarks about disability was eye-opening. And I think as a child, because I'm a white privileged child with no disabilities, I think all of that kind of commentary probably flew over my head at the age of 12, and it didn't really mean anything to me, so I didn't really remember it about the novel. But going back into this as an adult was quite an eye-opener. So I did go and actually read Goodreads. It never really occurred to me to go and read Goodreads on this before, because you just think, oh, it's a children's classic, like everybody obviously loves this book. Why would I go on Goodreads to go and have a look at what people are saying on there? And actually, yeah, a lot of people who are talking about this book today are actually talking about those themes that are in this book. So rather than really go into that in this particular video, because otherwise it's going to push the video to be really long, I am going to do a separate video later on this week to talk about my experience rereading this again as an adult, and the sort of problematic things that I actually stumbled on in this book and how I now feel about this book. So for now I would say that on a reread I'm probably going to rate this book as a 2.5. So yeah, just keep your eyes peeled for a video later this week, and we will sort of really get into that and how that in my mind has fallen from a 5 down to a 2.5 on a reread as an adult. And then finally, because The Secret Garden had not gone quite how I thought that it was going to go, I decided to go with an author who never lets me down. And I started reading The Dead Zone by Stephen King, which I had mentioned again, that was a book that I wanted to get around to reading soon, because it seemed to be a prequel in some way for Cujo. Now I can't rate this or say much about it this week because I'm only about 30% through, so that will be coming up in next week's review, obviously, when I finish reading that. But yeah, it just made me laugh actually that, you know, I'd actually have to go to Stephen King to calm down from reading the children's classic The Secret Garden. So yeah, you know, we've gone through quite a lot this week. I've read quite a lot of different stuff. You know, I've been reading literary fiction, we've had like dystopian, we've had fantasy, a bit of horror with Stephen King, you know, and we've been looking at different time zones, and we've been looking at literature that's been spread across different continents as well. So I do feel like I've had a really fulfilling reading week. And yeah, the thing with The Secret Garden was like a bit of a shock to me, but you know what, I'm glad as an adult that I did go and reread that book, because it did, I had rose tinted glasses I think about it before, which I don't have now. So let me know in the comments below if you've read any of the books that I've reviewed this week, and if you've got any comments on them. Yeah, I've really enjoyed speaking to you again on this video and doing these reviews, and I will see you later on this week. Speak to you soon. Bye.